If you think the biggest story in North American geopolitics right now is happening in Washington, you are looking at the wrong capital. While the United States is busy slapping tariffs on its closest allies and sending people to manage airport food courts, Canada just quietly signed one of the most consequential strategic partnerships in its modern history, and the other country at the table is not who you would expect. Before we go deeper, if you want sharp, clear coverage of the political and economic forces reshaping the United States, Canada, and the world, subscribe to the channel. No noise, no spin, just the story. Here is what happened. Canada and South Korea have formalized a full-scale security and defense cooperation partnership, the first defense agreement Canada has ever signed with any nation in the Indo-Pacific. And sitting at the center of it is a submarine procurement contest that could be worth somewhere between $60 billion and $120 billion across its full life cycle. That is not a typo, and that number does not even capture everything else moving in this relationship right now. We are talking energy, artificial intelligence, steel, electric vehicles, satellites, space technology, and a national industrial strategy that two countries are building together, deliberately, and with a clear-eyed understanding of exactly why they are doing it. That reason is sitting in the White House. Now, to be clear, neither Ottawa nor Seoul is going to say that out loud in a formal press release. Diplomacy does not work that way. But when you look at the timeline, the sequence of decisions, and the specific sectors these two countries are investing in together, the message is not subtle. Two American allies, both of whom have been hit with tariffs, both of whom have watched Washington treat long-standing partnerships as transactional bargaining chips, have decided to stop waiting for the relationship to get better and start building something that does not depend on it. That is the story, and it is bigger than most people are giving it credit for. Let's start with the submarine deal because that is where the numbers get genuinely staggering. Canada has been looking to replace its aging submarine fleet for years. The current submarines are decades old, massively underfunded, and by most credible assessments, not fit to do the job Canada needs them to do in increasingly contested Arctic and Pacific waters. So Canada launched a procurement process, and two serious contenders showed up. One is Germany's TKMS. The other is a joint bid from South Korean shipbuilders Hanwha Ocean and Hyundai Heavy Industries. The South Korean offer is not modest. Hanwha and Hyundai came in with an initial acquisition bid of somewhere between $20 and $24 billion for the first phase of the contract. That covers the construction and delivery of 4 submarines. And here is where it gets interesting. Canada's own internal timeline said it wanted to receive 1 submarine by 2035. The South Korean consortium is offering 4 by that same deadline. 4 versus 1, at a competitive price, from a country that is currently one of the most aggressive and capable naval shipbuilders on the planet. And Hanwha is not just sending a brochure. The company is planning to sail one of its KSS-3 attack submarines, a working operational vessel, to the British Columbia coast as a live capability demonstration. No other bidder in this process has done anything remotely like that. Germany is submitting documents. South Korea is parking a submarine off your coastline and saying, "Look at what we build." That is a very different kind of sales pitch. The full lifecycle value of this contract, maintenance, upgrades, training, support, everything a submarine fleet needs over 50-plus years of service, is estimated between $60 billion and $120 billion. Now that is a wide range, and it is important to be honest about what that number is and what it is not. It is an estimate. The contract has not been awarded. The decision is expected by the end of 2026, so when you see that headline figure, understand it reflects decades of projected spending, not a check that has already been written. But even the bottom end of that estimate represents one of the largest defense procurement decisions in Canadian history, and the submarines are only one part of what is being built here. In January 2026, Hanwha signed industrial partnership agreements with 5 Canadian companies. 5. The names are worth paying attention to: Algoma Steel, Telesat, MDA Space, Cohere, and PV Labs. That list covers structural steel for shipbuilding, AI systems for submarine operations, satellite connectivity, and space technology. This is not one company signing one deal. This is a deliberate industrial architecture being constructed across multiple sectors simultaneously. KPMG, the global consulting firm, ran the projections on what this partnership could generate for Canada's workforce if Hanwha wins the submarine contract and follows through on its commitments. Their estimate? More than 200,000 person-years of employment across Canada between 2026 and 2040. That works out to roughly 15,000 jobs annually for over a decade. Now, it is worth noting, as critics have pointed out, that these projections are entirely contingent on Hanwha winning the contract. MOUs are not binding. Job projections tied to unawarded contracts are not guarantees. That is a legitimate and important caveat to keep in mind. But the scope of what is being proposed here is real, and the industrial logic behind it is sound. Take Algoma Steel as a specific example, because it illustrates exactly what this partnership means at the ground level. Algoma Steel is based in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Last year, the company was forced to lay off approximately 1,000 workers. The reason? American tariffs on Canadian steel, imposed under the broader trade pressure that has been defining the US-Canada relationship under the current administration. Those are real jobs, real families, real communities that got hit by a policy decision made in Washington for reasons that had nothing to do with Algoma or Sault Ste. Marie. Hanwha's partnership with Algoma includes a commitment to support the development of a new structural steel beam mill at the facility. If that mill gets built, it could rehire up to 500 of those displaced workers. The arrangement involves Algoma paying Hanwha 3% of net mill sales annually for 10 years, so this is a genuine commercial partnership, not charity. But the economic relief for a community that was directly wounded by U.S. trade policy, coming from a South Korean defense company, is a detail that tells you almost everything you need to know about where we are in 2026. Now let's zoom out to the broader trade picture, because the economic foundation of this relationship is stronger than most people realize. Canada and South Korea have had a free trade agreement since 2015. In the decade since that agreement took effect, bilateral merchandise trade has essentially doubled. Canadian exports to South Korea grew from around $4 billion in 2015 to approximately $7.6 billion in 2024. Today, 99% of Canadian exports to South Korea are duty-free. In the first half of 2025 alone, Canadian exports to South Korea hit $8.2 billion, already exceeding the total for all of 2024. South Korea is currently Canada's seventh largest trading partner, with total bilateral merchandise trade reaching $24.5 billion in 2024. That is not a relationship being built from scratch. That is a relationship being upgraded, deliberately, strategically, and with urgency. Here is something worth asking yourself. When did you last hear a serious, sustained conversation in mainstream North American media about Canada's trade relationship with South Korea? Probably not often. And yet the numbers have been growing steadily for a decade, and now they are accelerating at exactly the moment Canada needs new economic partners most. That is not a coincidence. In April 2026, Canada sent its second Team Canada trade mission to Seoul. More than 180 business delegates representing over 100 organizations made that trip. This is not a diplomatic photo opportunity. This is an industrial mobilization. The message being sent to Seoul, to Beijing, to Brussels, and yes, to Washington, is that Canada is open for business with partners who treat it like one. The defense and industrial dimensions of this deal are only part of the picture. The energy relationship between Canada and South Korea is deepening at the same time. South Korea is a massive importer of liquefied natural gas, and Canada has been positioning LNG exports as a cornerstone of its economic strategy with Asian partners. Beyond LNG, the two countries are cooperating on nuclear energy, a relationship that goes back 50 years to South Korea's adoption of Canada's CANDU reactor technology. That anniversary is being marked not just symbolically, but with active discussions about the next generation of nuclear cooperation. In the electric vehicle and battery space, LG Energy Solution and Stellantis co-invested $5 billion into the Nexstar battery plant in Windsor, Ontario. That facility came online in October 2025 and currently employs around 1,100 workers, with projections pointing toward 2,500 workers by late 2026. This is South Korean industrial investment in Canadian manufacturing at scale, and it is happening in one of Canada's most economically important automotive regions at exactly the moment the EV transition is reshaping what the auto sector looks like globally. On the mining and resources side, POSCO Holdings, South Korea's massive steel and materials conglomerate, made a significant investment in Canadian lithium through the Invest Alberta partnership in 2024. Hanwha Energy has similarly identified Alberta as a target for hydrogen investment. Alberta, for its part, signed its first ever Memorandum of Understanding with the Hanwha Group, covering energy, manufacturing, and defense. For a province whose identity has been built around oil and gas, and whose economic relationship with the United States has been its defining strategic anchor, that MOU represents something genuinely new. Do you think this kind of diversification away from U.S. economic dependence is smart long-term strategy for Canada, or does it risk complicating an already strained relationship with Washington? That is a real question, and it is worth sitting with, because the answer is not as obvious as it might seem. Let's talk about AI for a moment, because it is woven through this partnership in ways that are easy to miss if you are only looking at the headline numbers. Cohere, the Toronto-based AI company, is one of the 5 Canadian firms in Hanwha's industrial partnership network. The collaboration specifically includes AI integration for submarine systems, which means the vessels Canada might eventually operate could be running Canadian-developed artificial intelligence for navigation, threat detection, and operational support. MDA Space and Telesat bring satellite and space connectivity into the mix. Tenstorrent, another Toronto-based AI chip developer backed by Samsung Securities, is co-developing AI chiplets. Ottawa-based Caxis has partnered with Samsung Electronics on AI supply chain optimization. The picture that emerges is not just a weapons procurement story. It is a technology partnership designed to embed Canadian AI, space, and advanced manufacturing capability into a major allied defense framework. That has long-term industrial and geopolitical implications that go well beyond the submarines themselves. Now, it is also worth understanding what South Korea is getting out of this relationship, because this is not a charity arrangement. South Korea has an explicit national goal of becoming the world's fourth largest defense exporter by 2027, targeting more than 31 billion Canadian dollars in annual defense exports. The country has backed that ambition with a national growth fund of 150 trillion won, roughly 150 billion Canadian dollars, focused on advanced industries. Winning the Canadian submarine contract would be a landmark reference point for South Korean defense exports globally. Landing a 50-plus year life cycle deal with a G7 NATO ally is not just revenue. It is a credential that opens doors everywhere else in the world. So when South Korea shows up to this relationship with serious money, serious technology, and a submarine parked off the BC coast, understand that it is also showing up with serious strategic intent. This is not altruism. Both sides are building something they need. That is actually what makes it durable. Now let's be honest about the uncertainties, because there are real ones. The submarine contract has not been awarded. Germany's TKMS remains a credible competitor, with deep experience and an established relationship with NATO procurement standards. Canada's decision process is complex, politically sensitive, and subject to industrial offset requirements, regional job commitments, and long-term support infrastructure considerations. The deal expected by end of 2026 is still a decision point, not a foregone conclusion. The KPMG employment projections, while substantial, are tied entirely to Hanwha winning. If TKMS wins, those numbers do not materialize in the same form. And Canadian critics, including conservative opposition figures who have questioned the binding nature of MOUs, are right to point out that memorandums of understanding are not contracts. They are statements of intent. The space between intent and execution can be very large, especially when the central procurement decision remains outstanding. The framing of this partnership as Canada's most consequential economic realignment since the 1988 Free Trade Agreement with the United States is an editorial judgment, not a verified policy assessment. It is an interesting comparison to reach for, and there is a reasonable argument behind it, but it is analytical opinion and should be understood as such. And the total life cycle value of $60 to $120 billion, while technically defensible as a range, is the kind of number that gets used in headlines precisely because of how large it sounds. The actual contracted value in the near term, if South Korea wins, would be in the $20 to $24 billion range for the initial build phase. The rest is projected across decades and subject to all the uncertainty that 50 years of geopolitics and technology change typically involves. So what does all of this mean for you? Let's take it country by country. If you are Canadian, this story touches almost every major economic pressure point you are living with right now. The tariff pain, the auto sector uncertainty, the LNG export opportunity, the AI competitiveness question, the Arctic sovereignty concern, the search for reliable allies who will not weaponize the trading relationship against you the next time there is a domestic political calculation to be made in Washington. The Canada-South Korea partnership is not a replacement for the U.S. relationship. Canada and the United States are too economically and geographically intertwined for that to be a serious proposition. But it represents a genuine attempt to build leverage, alternatives, and resilience. It is Canada saying, "We are not going to wait for permission." If you are American, this story might feel distant, but pay attention to what it signals. Two of your closest allies, one in North America, one in the Indo-Pacific, both treaty partners, both economically integrated with the United States, are actively reducing their strategic dependence on Washington. Not hostile, not adversarial, just less dependent. And they are doing it together, in defense, energy, technology, and trade simultaneously. That is a realignment, and it is happening not because either country wants conflict with the United States, but because the United States has made the cost of dependence feel too high. The broader global dimension is this. South Korea's defense export ambitions are not happening in a vacuum. The world is rearming. NATO allies are under pressure to hit 2% GDP defense spending targets. Indo-Pacific partners are reassessing their security architectures in response to Chinese naval expansion and North Korean missile developments. In that environment, South Korean shipbuilders offering NATO-compatible submarines with fast delivery timelines and competitive pricing are going to find buyers. Canada, being an early and serious partner in that relationship, positions both countries advantageously in a world where defense industrial capacity has become a strategic asset. And here is the thing that keeps getting underestimated in coverage of this story. The optics of a South Korean submarine arriving on the British Columbia coast for a live demonstration is not just a sales event. It is a geopolitical signal visible to every country watching Canada's procurement process. It says that South Korea is committed enough to this relationship to deploy hardware to prove the point. That is the kind of credibility that usually takes years to build. Hanwha is trying to compress that timeline by making the capability tangible rather than theoretical. The decision expected by end of 2026 will tell us a great deal, not just about which submarine Canada chooses, but about the kind of country Canada is choosing to become. A country that maintains the transatlantic defense axis as its primary reference point, or a country that is genuinely building a multi-directional strategic posture that includes Asia in a meaningful way for the first time. That is not a small choice. And the fact that it is being made right now, in this political moment, against the backdrop of a U.S. administration that has treated allies as leverage rather than partners, makes it one of the most consequential foreign policy inflection points Canada has seen in a generation. What was thought of as a stable, predictable, almost automatic relationship, Canada looking south for security, south for trade, south for everything, is no longer automatic. And the countries paying attention to that shift are moving quickly to fill the space. South Korea moved first among Asian partners. And it did not move quietly. 200,000 person-years of projected employment, a submarine demonstration off the BC coast, 5 industrial partnerships signed in a single January, a trade mission of nearly 200 delegates, an MOU with Alberta, a battery plant already running in Windsor, lithium investments in the West, hydrogen investment in Alberta, 50 years of nuclear cooperation and a new chapter beginning, AI integration across defense systems, space technology woven into the deal. This is not one handshake and a press photo. This is a construction project, and the foundation is being poured right now. The submarine decision will be the headline, but the real story is what comes after it, and more importantly, what this relationship signals about where Canada is heading, who it is building with, and why a middle power that spent decades as a comfortable junior partner to the world's largest economy has decided that comfort is no longer a strategy. The question worth watching is not just whether Hanwha wins. The question is whether this partnership holds, deepens, and delivers. Whether the projections become reality, whether the MOUs become contracts, whether the submarines get built, and whether Canada's bet on a more diversified strategic posture actually pays off across the decades it is designed to span. We are at the beginning of that answer, not the end. Stay with us as this story develops. The submarine decision alone is worth watching closely, and we will be covering every major development as it unfolds. If this kind of in-depth coverage matters to you, subscribe to the channel. New videos drop regularly, and this story is far from over.